We've identified 9 separate crime scenes.
Shots fired, shots fired.
Some guy ran in our house bleeding everywhere. He said he got run over by a car.
I gave him CPR for 10 minutes before the paramedics showed up.
Hey, Elliot Rodger here.
Under the soft golden light of a summer day, the town of Isla Vista, a peaceful place for young college students, suddenly turned into hell on earth. Sirens blared, screams echoed. Police, ambulances, and terrified citizens flooded the streets. Roads once familiar were now stained with blood. Bodies lay still under the fading sunlight, and the world was left in shock, asking one question. What drove a 22-year-old to become a mass murderer? It was May 23, 2014. 6 people were killed, 14 others injured. The perpetrator, Elliot Rodger, a young college student, the son of well-known film director Peter Rodger. No one suspected that behind his quiet, withdrawn appearance was a mind filled with hatred, pain, and dangerously deep isolation. Step by step, Elliot had been preparing for this massacre, coldly, deliberately, and without remorse. Just hours before the attack, Elliot uploaded a video titled "My Final Video." In it, he sat in his car, eyes filled with rage, voice trembling with a sense of twisted justice. He declared that he would punish humanity, especially women, those he believed had ignored and humiliated him his entire life. The video wasn't a goodbye. It was a manifesto of vengeance addressed to the world. And that was only the tip of the iceberg. After the massacre, police discovered journals and a 140-page manifesto titled "My Twisted World." In it, Elliot meticulously chronicled his life, thoughts, pain, hatred, and a murder plan laid out with terrifying detail. It became clear this was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a long-brewing storm fueled by untreated mental illness, social neglect, and a growing obsession with revenge. For some, Elliot Rodger is no longer just an individual. He has become a disturbing icon of the dangerous incel subculture, a group of men who live in involuntary celibacy and harbor deep resentment toward women and society. After the killings, his name was glorified on dark online forums as a trailblazer, a hero of revenge. The Isla Vista massacre was no longer just personal tragedy. It was a grim warning about how online extremism can fester in silence. But where did Elliot's descent begin? How did a boy once described as sensitive, nature-loving, and thoughtful become a cold-blooded killer? What were the turning points in his life? The psychological cracks that deepened with time? Could this have been prevented if someone, his family, his school, society, had truly seen him? We'll trace back through Elliot's past, from a seemingly happy childhood riddled with subtle red flags, through family upheavals that shattered his worldview, to the growing isolation, jealousy, and anger that built like pressure in a sealed chamber. Every moment, every distant gaze, every whispered thought, every twisted smile was a piece of the puzzle leading to a bloody end. This was not impulsive. He planned this, he imagined it, he wrote it down, he recorded it on camera. It was as if Elliot needed the world to witness what he saw as his legacy, a testament to his existence in a world he believed had erased him. That burning desire to be noticed, to be loved, when left unmet, morphed into a fire that consumed his sanity and humanity. The Elliot Rodger case forced America to reckon with how it treats mental health, youth isolation, and the unchecked spread of hate online. It was the tragedy of one person, but also a symptom of a larger failure. A system that missed every warning sign. And what's even more terrifying, Elliot wasn't alone. He was one of the first, but not the last, to be inspired by organized hatred. His actions raised chilling questions about the role of internet forums, families, educators, and society at large in identifying and intervening in early stages of radicalization. The next 35 minutes won't just recount a massacre. This is a deep psychological dive into the mind of a killer. Not to excuse, but to understand. Understand so we can prevent. Understand so we can protect. Because sometimes the mass murderer was once just a kid that no one listened to. This is the story of Elliot Rodger, a boy lost, a mass murderer, a distorted symbol of desperation, and a haunting reminder that when society turns a blind eye to suffering, disaster will speak for itself. Beneath the surface of a well-educated teenager, raised in an affluent family and surrounded by the arts, Elliot Rodger was a storm waiting to erupt. The Isla Vista massacre, didn't begin weeks or even months before the event. It had been growing quietly for years. The seeds of destruction were planted in early childhood, in a life that appeared ordinary, yet was riddled with emotional fractures few noticed or acknowledged. This is the journey back to where it all began. Elliot Rodger was born on July 24, 1991, in London, England. His mother, a Chinese-Malaysian woman, worked as a nurse. His father, Peter Rodger, was a British filmmaker and commercial director with a rising career in the entertainment industry. At first glance, Elliot's early life appeared picture-perfect. The family often visited parks, museums, and zoos. Photographs captured moments of joy, and in his own later writings, Elliot would describe this time as the happiest years of his life. But the first cracks didn't appear through trauma. They emerged through subtle but persistent psychological tension. Elliot was different from other children. He was quiet, reserved, and preferred to write his thoughts rather than speak them. At preschool parent-teacher conferences, teachers would note that Elliot often played alone, avoided group activities, and struggled with verbal communication. Some even suspected he had selective mutism, a rare anxiety disorder where children are unable to speak in certain social settings. Although never officially diagnosed, Elliot was clearly isolated from an early age. He began to retreat into his own internal world, a place where he was the center, where only he could understand himself. At age 6, his life took a sharp turn. His family moved from London to Los Angeles, a cultural and emotional shock Elliot couldn't fully absorb. Just a year later, Elliot's parents divorced. For any child, divorce can be traumatic. But for someone as sensitive and socially withdrawn as Elliot, it was a shattering experience. His parents began separate lives. A year later, his father remarried Sumaya Akbar, a Moroccan actress. The relationship between Elliot and his stepmother was tense. Elliot often felt abandoned and jealous of Sumaya and her biological son, Jazz. This was the moment when a dangerous belief began to form in Elliot's mind, that wealth and fame were the keys to love, success, and validation. His father, a successful Hollywood director who even worked on The Hunger Games, became both a role model and an object of envy. Elliot believed his father had everything: power, women, respect, and so he too deserved everything, no matter the cost. As Elliot entered adolescence, he became increasingly withdrawn. The rare occasions he had friends often ended in him locking himself away in his room or storming off in anger if he felt overlooked. He disliked sharing. He craved control, and when things didn't go his way, he lashed out. In the rare instances when he did bond with someone, he became possessive, jealous, and furious if they spent time with others. His social relationships were toxic, early signs of a personality disorder in the making. Things escalated in middle school. Elliot continued to be the outsider. He was mocked for his clothes, his posture, his accent. One particular incident, where a girl publicly humiliated him in front of her friends, became a defining moment. In his later manifesto, Elliot pointed to that event as the moment I began a lifelong hatred of the female gender. As time passed, Elliot sank deeper into depression, jealousy, and delusion. He couldn't understand why others so easily made friends, got girlfriends, and enjoyed life while he remained invisible. Slowly, his self-esteem crumbled, only to be replaced by a dangerous superiority complex. He began to believe that he was better than everyone else, and that the world was too stupid to recognize his worth. One of the warning signs missed by many was Elliot's constant switching of schools. His family tried placing him in various academic environments to help him integrate, but nothing worked. He continued to be bullied, rejected, and ridiculed. Each new school only deepened his belief that society was hostile, unjust, and broken. At one point, Elliot was even homeschooled, but this only isolated him further. He spent more and more time online, browsing forums and videos, searching for a place where someone, anyone, understood him. Instead of healing, Elliot found toxicity. He stumbled into dark online communities that fed his anger, supported his misogyny, and amplified his belief that the world owed him something. In 2009, Elliot graduated from Independence High School, a small institution with just around 100 students. But there was no joyful ceremony, no friends celebrating. Elliot stepped into adulthood empty-handed, no purpose, no direction, and no hope. He then began enrolling in various colleges, including Pierce Community College and later Santa Barbara City College. But no matter where he went, the pattern remained: isolation, rejection, failure. One day, a group of students threw eggs at him. Elliot reacted by pulling a knife, not to stab, but as a desperate warning. Even then, no one saw the crisis reaching its tipping point. Rather than receiving mental health support, Elliot was treated as just another struggling student. During this period, his psychological deterioration accelerated. He believed that moving to Santa Barbara, a place filled with sunshine, beaches, and attractive girls, would be his rebirth. But what he found instead was deeper loneliness, stronger envy, and increasingly dangerous fantasies. He began documenting his darkest emotions through videos, journals, and online rants. Elliot saw himself as someone the world had wronged, and if women didn't love him, they deserved to be punished. If society ignored him, it would have to pay. Each journal entry, each cold stare into his camera was a breadcrumb on the trail to something horrific. This stage of his life had no bloodshed yet, no gunshots, no sirens. But the massacre had already begun. Inside the mind of a lonely, wounded young man no one listened to. This was Elliot Rodger before he became a killer. A boy abandoned, a soul lost in darkness, and a chilling reminder that the most dangerous wounds are often the ones no one can see. As Elliot entered early adulthood, the darkness inside him didn't fade, it grew deeper. No longer just the loneliness or sense of abandonment that marked his teenage years, Elliot now carried within him a toxic ideology, formed through years of suppression and emotional wounds that were never healed. The cracks began to widen, and Elliot's perception of the world completely changed. By early 2011, Elliot officially dropped out of school. At this point, he had lost patience with the college environment and the people around him, people he believed were inferior but more loved than me. Instead of trying to integrate or seek healing, Elliot sank deeper into a private world, one where he was both the victim and the judge. He began creating videos, recording dark thoughts about life, women, and society. In them, he described himself as the last true gentleman, someone of refined quality ignored by the world. What made these videos truly alarming was that they weren't just rants. They were the early documentation of a radicalizing mind. In each clip, Elliot expressed contempt for men he saw as ugly but still had girlfriends, and deep hatred for the young women who paid no attention to him. He believed he had everything: designer clothes, a luxury BMW, polite manners, yet none of it was enough to earn affection. That imagined injustice began to distort his worldview. Elliot believed he wasn't being rejected because of his own flaws, but because the world itself was broken. He developed a belief system in which women were enemies, the root of all his suffering. Not only had they rejected him, he said in his videos, but they gave their affection to obnoxious, undeserving guys. The world Elliot imagined became increasingly warped. In his eyes, women had no right to choose. They should love only those who were worthy, like him. And if they didn't, they deserved to be punished. His online posts took on a clearly hateful tone. He began writing racist rants against black people and Asians, even though he himself was half Asian. He referred to people in relationships as parasites, idiots blessed by society. It didn't stop there. Elliot began testing small acts of aggression to feel power. One time, standing behind a couple in Starbucks, he became so enraged that he followed them to their car and threw an entire cup of hot coffee at them. While some might call it a minor outburst, for Elliot it was a taste of control, a moment where he crossed into criminal behavior. Soon after, he repeated a similar act with 2 female students. Though the attacks didn't cause serious injury, they laid the groundwork for increasingly dangerous behavior. Elliot was no longer just fantasizing, he was acting, and most frightening of all, he felt satisfied. More and more, Elliot became obsessed with material standards. He believed money could solve all problems. He spent most of his monthly allowance on Armani sunglasses, designer clothing, and luxury goods. He even drove to Nevada and Arizona just to buy lottery tickets. He believed he was destined to win, that it was fate. When he lost, Elliot didn't see it as bad luck. In his mind, the world was conspiring against him. I was supposed to win. I deserved salvation. Why would the universe treat me like this, he wrote. To Elliot, failure wasn't a lesson. It was a personal insult. This thinking pushed him into deeper helplessness. He stopped believing he could change his life through effort. He didn't seek work, didn't build relationships, didn't try to grow as a person. He clung to one hope: money or violence would bring him recognition. And if both failed, revenge would be the only option left. During this period, Elliot began systematically building his revenge narrative. He documented every idea through videos, journals, and a 141-page manifesto. In it, he outlined a detailed plan to punish humanity. Step by step, he imagined himself as a god of wrath, the one with power to decide who lived and who died. This mindset didn't appear overnight. It was the product of years of unresolved emotional pain. No one truly listened to Elliot. No one intervened when the warning signs emerged. His family thought he was just quirky. Teachers dismissed him as socially awkward. The internet, instead of helping him heal, became an echo chamber encouraging hate. A key detail during this time was Elliot's growing obsession with crafting his persona for the camera. He filmed with ideal lighting, practiced his voice, carefully chose backdrops and sunny hours to shoot. He didn't just want to get revenge. He wanted to immortalize the moment as a kind of art. By then, Elliot was no longer a lonely young man. He had become the villain in a film he was directing. During this time, a former classmate even reported Elliot's disturbing comments to school officials. But the warning was never escalated to a counselor or authorities. A stranger once emailed Elliot's mother with a chilling message: "Your son is heading down a dangerous path. Please intervene before it's too late." But all these red flags were ignored. He kept shopping, kept uploading videos, kept journaling. But every word and every stare into the camera became colder, more hollow. Elliot was no longer emotionally connected to his real self. He only found value in his imagined persona, strong, worshipped, and feared. In his journal, Elliot once wrote, "I've done everything to be attractive. I dress well, I drive a nice car, I'm a gentleman, but no one sees it." He didn't understand that attraction isn't based solely on looks or possessions. He couldn't accept that people have the right to choose whom they love. To Elliot, every rejection was a moral crime. That belief transformed Elliot from a wounded individual into a real threat. He no longer just hated women, he despised anyone who was happy. Couples holding hands in the street, students laughing at cafes, they were all enemies in his eyes. He believed they existed solely to provoke him, to flaunt the happiness he never had. And just like that, his ideology was complete. A warped belief that he was the ultimate victim, and that he had the right to punish the world. Elliot was no longer a lonely boy, he was a ticking time bomb. Every action now became preparation. He acquired weapons, recorded declaration videos, rehearsed his lines. He made a schedule, studied the layout of sorority houses, stalked potential victims, and even calculated the ideal lighting for his final video. His psychological storm had reached its peak. No one could save Elliot Rodger, not because it was impossible, but because it was too late. And as the world remained silent, Elliot decided to speak in the only language he believed could not be ignored: blood. The night of May 23, 2014, began like any other in Isla Vista. Students strolled down sidewalks, music echoed from apartment windows, cafes buzzed with life. No one knew that a nightmare was unfolding, minute by minute, and its source lived among them. Around 9 p.m., Elliot Rodger began executing his plan. Inside his small apartment, his first victims were his 3 roommates. In his journal, Elliot had written that he would kill them the way I would squash an insect. Armed with knives and boiling water, he attacked them with brutal efficiency. There were no gunshots, no warnings, just a terrifying silence broken by blood and screams. The bodies were later discovered scattered across the rooms. Police reported multiple stab wounds, and at least one victim had severe burns. This wasn't the impulsive act of someone in a moment of rage. It was the calculated violence of someone who had rehearsed the scene in his mind thousands of times. After the killings, Elliot changed into clean clothes, as if preparing for the next act of his performance. At 9:20 p.m., Elliot left his apartment in his BMW, carrying 3 handguns and over 400 rounds of ammunition. His next target, a sorority house, one he believed represented the people who had rejected and humiliated me. He pulled up in front, rolled down his window, and opened fire on 3 women standing outside. Two died on the spot, the third was severely injured. The entire attack lasted just seconds. But Elliot didn't stop there. He drove through Isla Vista, shooting at anyone he saw. Cyclists, pedestrians, even people sitting in parked cars. Witnesses recalled hearing shots from multiple directions. Some thought it was fireworks or cars revving. Police began receiving a flood of emergency calls, but the situation was already spiraling beyond control. Within 10 minutes, Elliot had created chaos across nearly 3 miles of town. He fired indiscriminately from his car windows, rammed into pedestrians, smashed into poles, and swerved erratically to avoid police. He even entered a convenience store, shooting a man in the head, an act captured by the store's security cameras. Around 9:30 p.m., Elliot had a direct encounter with police. An officer approached his vehicle from the opposite direction. Elliot opened fire. The officer returned shots, hitting Elliot in the leg. But instead of surrendering, Elliot accelerated, striking 2 pedestrians and breaking their legs. His BMW began to fail, its tires wobbling, the engine screeching like a wounded beast. The chase ended when Elliot crashed into a parked Jeep. When officers surrounded the vehicle, they found Elliot dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Inside the car were weapons, ammunition, knives, and printed copies of his manifesto. Police searched his apartment immediately after. What they found resembled a war room. His computer contained hundreds of pages of journals, unpublished videos, and photos of Elliot posing in mirrors beside his weapons and car. Most chilling of all was his plan, detailed to the minute, with victim names, timing, and even backup strategies in case of resistance. What made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was the reactions of those who had lived near Elliot. Neighbors had heard strange noises that night but assumed it was a birthday party. A delivery man said Elliot was always polite, never seemed off. These testimonies emphasize just how terrifying it is when a killer can blend in, hiding evil behind a calm face. After the massacre, excerpts from Elliot's journals were made public, revealing his extreme psychological distortion. He didn't just hate women, he resented his own family. He called his mother a weak failure and described his father as a hypocritical fool. He even wrote that he felt exhilarated imagining the screams of those I will punish. These weren't just ramblings. They were the result of years of being ignored, misled, and ultimately consumed by despair. In Elliot's mind, he didn't die a loser. He believed he was a pioneer of an uprising for the forgotten, a twisted symbol later worshipped in certain incel communities as a legend. But reality paints a different picture. Elliot Rodger was no hero. He was a cold-blooded killer, a person who chose to cause pain rather than seek help. He left no meaningful legacy, only sorrow, trauma, and grief for the families of his victims. In the days after the attack, grieving parents spoke out. One father cried on national television, "Why was someone like this allowed to buy a gun legally? Who will be held responsible for my child's death?" Outrage spread across America. Protests erupted, calling for stricter gun control, better mental health care, and stronger online monitoring. But for many, it was too late. This final phase of the story wasn't just the conclusion of a mass murder plan. It was a wake-up call, a culmination of years of oversight, silence, and unaddressed danger. Elliot Rodger, once a lonely boy, had become the nightmare of an entire town. A brutal reminder of what happens when we fail to see the signs.